Hello, and welcome to this introduction to the video lecture series called Understanding Ourselves Through Our Human Values. Tens of thousands of years ago, humans became conscious living in small hunter-gatherer tribes scattered across the face of the earth. Life was nasty, brutish, and short for our ancestors, and they lived in extreme poverty, totally at the mercy of nature. After the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago, came the first major conscious human development. Farming started in the Middle East. The rise of the first agricultural civilization followed. Since then, there have been any number of civilizations that arose and fell in Eurasia, the Americas, and Africa. All those agricultural civilizations were built on the same principle: might is right. That is, power goes to whoever has the biggest army and/or is the most ruthless. The values of a warrior caste, conquest, colonialism, and slavery were standard operating procedure for agricultural civilizations as they rose, and most of them succumbed to the same logic of power as they fell. Then in the West, around 500 years ago, things began to change. After 130 years of religious wars in Europe and refugees from those religious wars settling in North America, freedom of conscience was established. You leave me alone with my beliefs, and I'll leave you alone with yours. This mutual restraint, the result of war weariness rather than moral principle, turned out to be the first step away from might is right towards reason is right. There was a scientific revolution which included the capture of energy from fossil fuels, mechanical energy at first but later electrical energy, and the gradual development of the rule of law, the codification of mutual restraint, gradually replacing physical might with conscious reason as the principal means of setting society's direction. A new set of values for civilized society emerged to replace the outdated warrior caste values of old. We can call them our human values. Central to these values was the idea of we humans as individually conscious beings with free will and minds of our own, who need liberty to flourish. Around 1800, with that idea of liberty operationalized, capitalism really gets going in the West. Why the West? Anything special about them? Not really. It was mainly a function of geographical luck and cultural good fortune. Absolutely nothing to do with anybody's genes, skull size, or skin pigmentation. Now the break with might is right accelerates. Progress. Nature gives humans a very poor standard of living. Nothing personal. Mother Nature treats us just like any other animal. Then comes breakthrough exponential progress. Before 1800, there had been a trickle of progress over millennia. Some energy from animals, wind and water, heat from wood, light from whale oil. The science revolution had led to the application of metallurgy and the development of steel. There were ocean-going ships, navigation, and many other applications of technology and innovation. Then suddenly, from this modest base, breakthrough, exponential progress. Breakthrough progress meant increasing knowledge, wealth, and health. We have progressed from libraries in monasteries with books that only a few could read to mass literacy and the instant access to information on the internet. Knowledge has exploded. From living in caves to walking on the moon, wealth has multiplied many, many times. One statistic to illustrate human progress. In the last century alone, global life expectancy has more than doubled. We are far, far healthier. Along with the progress comes a population explosion, first in the West, then it goes global. Exponential growth in knowledge, wealth and health means population rises dramatically, at first where it all started, then spreading. Together with progress comes tolerance. Tolerance, moving us away from tribalism's limitations. Might is right, agricultural civilizations were and are tribal. Reason is right means tolerance, moving us away from the limitation of tribalism toward the experiencing and valuing of human diversity. Increasing tolerance starts with freedom of conscience, and conscience doesn't allow the ultimate intolerance of one human being chained in ownership to another. So, slavery is abolished, and feudalism collapses. Feudalism, that's the tying of people to the ruler's land, collapses as people flock from agricultural villages to capitalist cities. Tolerance means freedom of conscience, freedom of enterprise, freedom of choice. Hot on the heels of freedom of conscience, that's freedom of belief and freedom of speech, comes freedom of enterprise, meaning private property. You leave my stuff alone and I'll leave yours alone. And free markets where I am free to sell the product of my labor, intellect and capital. And freedom of choice develops starting with the freedom of movement that was granted by coal-driven steam engines on rails, which we call trains, then gasoline-driven automobiles. From there, freedom of choice was extended with the emancipation of women, civil rights in the US, decolonization by Europe and gay rights, culminating in anti-discrimination laws that mean equality of all before the law. And democracy develops with the dialectic between liberalism and conservatism. Politics in the West is the natural dialectic of liberalism versus conservatism, and we call that democracy. Tolerance, like progress, comes to the West first. All this is, of course, an oversimplification. I should have warned any historians listening to cover their ears. But if nothing else, it allows three things. One, to introduce our human values, shown in bold capitals on the slide. Liberty, progress, tolerance, science. And in so doing, to introduce some of the themes of the video lecture series, Understanding Ourselves Through Our Human Values. Secondly, to comment on the fact that tolerance seems to lag progress. We can see that in the way that the progress-enabled population boom has spread around the world, but tolerance-inspired democracy, not as much. Even in the West, it was not until the end of the 20th century before we had real equality before the law. We can also derive caricatures by saying liberals tend to be a bit too fast with progress and conservatives a bit too slow with tolerance. Number three, to consider an interesting connection. Fossil fuels lie latent in the earth. Human values lie latent within us. Latent meaning just waiting there for us to discover them and to develop them. But today, there is widespread concern about using fossil fuels and widespread ignorance of our human values. Concerns about our use of fossil fuels is not the focus of this video lecture series. Rather, the widespread ignorance of our human values is. Western societies have just come through wrenching change. From agricultural village life, subject to might is right rule, we have migrated to big industrial cities, where reason is right is possible. In our advanced industrial societies, women have been liberated en masse and taken their rightful place in society. Different religions, sexualities and politics are accepted. we can see the beginning of the healing of the scourge of global tribalism, also known as racism, that European-led globalization brought starting 500 years ago. And we are taking note of and starting to fix the damage to our environment that exponential progress and the accompanying population boom has done. Most of us are now settled in our cities and towns with more food than we should eat, an abundance of material goods, opportunities for education, sport, adventure, and the rest. We understand that we live in no Garden of Eden. There's family breakdown, loneliness, addiction, crime, hate, and the rest. But we easily forget how far we have come by expanding liberty with progress, increasing knowledge, wealth, and health, so that humanity moves ever further away from the extreme poverty of nature into which we became conscious, and tolerance, freedom of conscience, freedom of enterprise, freedom of choice, as step by step we disinherit ourselves from the limitations of the tribalism of our ancestors. Our human values, liberty, progress, tolerance, science. This is how we went from might is right rule to our reason is right world. But we are in danger of losing our human values through ignorance. For example, too many young people leave high school with only a partial knowledge of humanity's progress, unaware of the most important event in world history. The most important event in human history, you didn't know? That would be when capitalism really got going in the West around 1800. And the poverty that human beings have known since time immemorial started to drop like a stone, at first in the West, then the rest of the world. And they leave school with the mistaken impression that slavery, that ultimate intolerance, is a white or US phenomenon. It would be far better if this were true, because then slavery would be a thing of the past. But it isn't true, and slavery today remains unabolished in many parts of the world outside the West. And they leave high school with very little appreciation of individual complexity and diversity, or the rationales of liberalism and conservatism. These basic ideas about ourselves are crucial to self-understanding. The only alternative to reason is right that we humans have ever known is the might is right that pervades our history. How should we remedy this ignorance? How do we go about understanding ourselves through our human values? A good start would be to consider our past, present, and future. History, our past, how we got here, well, that at first sight appears to be all about man's inhumanity to man. But that's tribal history. When we focus on human history, on our social development, then we start to see the big picture. Psychology, that's really our present. That's how we operate. That's how we're operating now. But that's been made popular as a description of us riddled with bias and irrationality. But there's much more to us than that. We need a better understanding of the human mind, a wider focus. And politics, which is our future, because that's how we might change things. Well, that's always been war by other means. Maybe to a cynical warmonger like Clausewitz, but for the West, the political process of a natural dialectic between liberalism and conservatism worked well until recently, expanding liberty with progress and tolerance. We need to fill in the gaps. We should go back to first principles and take lessons from the realistic school of social science, using our human values as a framework. Big picture, focused, filling the gaps. Is there such a thing as a realistic school of social science? Well, yes, if you consult the few remaining classical liberal academics, the mainstream conservatives in their think tanks, and the odd maverick, then you can get a balanced, reasoned, objective view of our past, present, and politics. We must never become so complacent as to believe that the horrors of our past can't return. Reason is right. The only known alternative to might is right. So, human values as a framework to understand ourselves. What does that look like? We are individually conscious with free will and minds of our own. Hence the core human value, individual liberty. And the proper goal of society being to expand liberty. Any conscious being will seek to escape the extreme poverty that nature provides. Progress is about increasing social development, developing the capacity to act, increasing knowledge, wealth, and health. We can't do this on our own. We can only do it in cooperation and competition with others. We need social order to make progress. Increasing the aggregate capacity to act within society is founded on social order. Social order has developed in two main stages: the coerced cooperation of agricultural civilizations and the rational cooperation of advanced industrial societies. That's one way we expand liberty. Society expands liberty through progress. The other way is through tolerance. Over time, we move away from the limitations of tribalism that we inherited. Tolerance is about reducing social segregation. That is, developing freedom of conscience, freedom of belief and speech, that is, freedom of enterprise, that's private property and free markets, and freedom of choice, where we go and how we live our lives. Mutual restraint and tolerance. We remove the external restraints imposed on us by the mighty and replace them with the codified mutual restraint that is the rule of law. Liberty is expanded through progress and tolerance. Both are driven by technology and innovation, the fruits of science. We expand liberty with progress and tolerance, science, technology, and innovation providing the tools. Conservatus, our name, is a Latin word whose definition resonates with us. It helps us define our mission. Conservatus, keep safe, intact, save from danger, our human values. 4 subjects, the 4 human values, and in total 16 video lectures. Here's a quick introduction to each of them. Liberty, the first one, 3 miracles. How is it that we are here? We, conscious individuals, came about as a result of 3 discontinuities that science cannot explain. So we turn to faith. And there's a trigger warning for new atheists. Your faith does not go unquestioned. Mind, do you have free will? Unless you believe you are the passive victim of some preordained fate, individual consciousness means free will and a mind of your own. Trigger warning for determinists. You may determine that you are wrong. Feel and think. How do we exercise free will? The mind is the most complex thing in the universe that we know of, but we should try to understand its workings. The trigger warning here is for students of Carl Jung. Liberties are taken with his model of the mind. but then this section is called liberty. Progress and tolerance. How do we expand liberty? By increasing the capacity to act, that's progress, and reducing external restraints, tolerance, that's how we expand liberty, individual liberty. Now, trigger warning here for environmentalists. Increase social development and reduce social segregation, not the reverse. On to progress. Geographical luck. How and where did agricultural civilizations develop? Social order version 1, with its large-scale coerced cooperation, didn't develop everywhere at the same time. Trigger warning for fascists. It had nothing to do with genes. Capitalism gets going. What was the most important event in world history? After ticking up at a snail's pace for millennia, suddenly, around 1800, the West achieves breakthrough progress and poverty plummets. The trigger warning here for Marxists. You probably need to go and find a safe space for this part. Cultural good fortune. Why did breakthrough progress happen in the West? The West's individualistic culture was an advantage in the two-horse race with China's more collectivist monoculture. Trigger warning for the West's detractors. Enlightenment values are important to the story. Social order version 2. What sustained the West's rise? Rational cooperation, which from its beginnings in the West has spread around the world, and with it progress. A trigger warning here for liberals. Progress rests first and foremost on social order. On to tolerance. Rule of law. How does society become tolerant? There are specific steps that the West took in moving from might is right to reason is right. The trigger warning here for authoritarians. We need democracy to write the rules. Gender. What about social segregation by gender? With social order version 2, no more biological determinism. We are left to experience, value and handle the diversity gender brings. Trigger warning for toxics of both genders. No one will ever win the battle of the sexes. There's too much fraternizing with the enemy. Ethnicity, race. When enforced ethnic racial segregation ends, then what? The US has a history of white tribe domination. That should be faced, subsequent developments examined, and some empathy found. Trigger warning for conservatives. You might want to, but you can't avoid this part. Inequality. What is society finding harder and harder to tolerate today? With a hierarchy supposedly built on competence, wealth segregation is widening due to multiple macroeconomic and cultural factors. Trigger warning for meritocrats. Even your kids have become risk averse. And politics. What constitutes politics in tolerant societies? Absent the extremes, different philosophies and different emphasis on moral principles complement each other, and things get done. Trigger warning for both sides. The other side has morals too. No, seriously. And finally, science. Problems. What role for science today? As facts are challenged, data politicized, and truth becomes slippery, science loses its prestige just as the problems get harder. Trigger warning though for science's detractors, there's no replacement for science. Climate change. What does science tell us about climate change? Climate science supports two different viewpoints on climate change. Both alarmists and skeptics make science-based arguments with science unable to provide resolution. Trigger warning for science's boosters. You've got your work cut out. Human values thinking. Do human values help explain the human condition? There are alternatives to the core value of liberty, and today our human values are flashing amber. Trigger warning for human values advocates. We are not above scrutiny. A series of video lectures to help you understand our human values. It's designed as a series with a start, various steps, and an end, but you can dip in and out as well. Join me, the author, an amateur historian, even more amateurish psychologist, and novice political scientist. I hope you will. Thank you for watching this introduction to the video lecture series, Understanding Ourselves Through Our Human Values. You can find the whole series on www.conservatus.com, where there's reasoning that resonates. Conservatus, keep safe, intact, safe from danger, our human values.